So once the plaster has set inside the paper cup or maybe the wax wafer that you've created, you want to pull this thing apart. And the easiest way to do it is to unlock your centric latch, remove the elastic bands if you have any elastic bands in the way, and then just gently pry the whole thing apart. It should come out just like that. It's a lot easier than opening it up at an angle. It's a lot easier just to lift it away. So you can take this out, and what we have is a nice imprint of the teeth there. And as I mentioned earlier, I went a little bit deeper than I'd like it to. So what I'm going to do next is remove my occlusal index. I'm going to cut the paper down the side, and I usually do it in the back so you don't see the little cut, which is not a big deal. And then from here you can use either your 6A or maybe a surgical blade. So you can either use your 6A or a surgical knife to cut the extra height of plaster and leave about a millimeter worth of depth embedding the teeth. Just gonna blow that off. So when you place the maxillary denture back into the index, you should feel, I'll take this apart. You should feel a very stable, almost like a locking position in there, okay? You can certainly remove the little extra lip from around the sides, but it's not necessary. It doesn't have to be extremely pretty, it just has to be effective. And that's there, that reestablishes the relation of the plane of occlusion to the hinge axis of the articulator. So it kind of duplicates the facebow transfer, okay? So we can set this one aside. You can see the bottom of the plaster has set thoroughly, so it's nice and smooth. You want to keep it in a nice clean place. And now we are ready to move to the next step. I'm just going to put everything back together. Just give it a final look. Make sure everything is back into centric. Nothing has moved. It shouldn't have, really. Just put my articulator back. Everything looks back into centric. And the next step would be to remove the acrylic bases from the master casts. Okay. Depending on the case, you might be able to pry the acrylic base off the master cast. You might be able to pry it. So you can do this with minimal pressure from the posterior portion to the interior portion. If you use excessive force here, you might warp the case. But I'm going very gently and I'm working my way to the front. So I have that. So I have the underside of the denture, a nice accurate fit, free of any stone debris, although I do feel some roughness here. The little minor roughness, you don't want to leave that on there. You can take a 6A and gently scrape just over the surface and it gets rid of it, okay? If you have any major sharpness because of the detail of the impression, you want to go in there with a very small round burr and take those out. But we'll get to that in a sec. So if you have this scenario where the master cast is intact, you don't need to do a clinical remount cast, as we're going to discuss in other videos. This is your clinical remount cast because this will support the acrylic base. Right? The only thing you might want to do is relieve some of the visible undercuts on the master cast to ensure that we don't flex the acrylic base every time we put it on and take it off, on and off. Okay? But we are going to assume that this cast does not exist. So therefore, we can't even mount it. So we're going to go through the process in another video of how to produce a maxillary clinical remount cast. On the lower now, I'm going to show you a bit of a different technique. The lower, I'm going to assume that we have severe undercuts, so I'm not even going to try to pry this acrylic base off the master cast. In fact, when you have excessive undercuts, what you want to do is actually destroy the master cast, obviously not the acrylic base. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to pry out the plaster from the sides, if I can. If it doesn't go, then what you want to do is possibly use a heavy item. Just going to get a plaster knife. You can use the back of your plaster knife and knock off initially the little plaster that's holding things together. So I'm just going to use the back of it. Maybe you want to use the wooden side so you don't damage your tool. So I'm gently cupping the case in my hand. I'm not trying to force it together. I'm trying to hold two things at once with one hand. And then just chip that out. Do the same thing on the other side. Be careful you don't hurt yourself, obviously. And then that should come out because all that vibration just kind of knocked it off because we only had the separator in there from before. So in this scenario, we're going to assume that there's severe undercuts and we're not able to take this off. So what you want to do is score the back of the model to create some stress points so we can actually break the model. So you can do a number of ways. You can use a cutting disc. You can use a thinner disc or a thicker disc. Usually the thin ones, they break off too easily. You can use a lathe or you can use a handpiece. Okay, I'll show you both ways. Let's just remove this pad so I can turn the vacuum on. And I'll start with my handpiece. And I'm going to make some scores on the back of the model. It really doesn't matter which way you do it, but you want to maybe create like 20 by 20 millimeter sections. And be sure not to go too deep because otherwise you might have running the risk of damaging the acrylic base. So with the disc that's relatively used, so it's balanced, I'm going to make some score lines here. So you have to be aware how thick the base is now. And not to cut into it too deep. So So let's see. I'm going to take the back of my plaster knife and see if I can pry this section out. So I'm trying to break the model. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. At this point, it would be a lot easier to continue with an air chisel or pneumatic chisel and break that section off. So obviously there's some strength to the stone here, and I'm trying to twist it out. And I'm not going to use excessive amount of force. If I keep going with this, then I'm running the risk of actually fracturing this posterior section of the denture out. Okay? So I'm going to continue with my sectioning of the cast. And there is no right or wrong way, but the smaller the sections, the better off you are. Right? So you can section it off this way and that way and so forth. I'll make multiple sections here, score the back of the cast, obviously not deep enough to damage the acrylic base, and then I'm going to go to the air chisel and section those off. It'll be a lot easier than trying to pry everything out, and especially on the lower, because you're going to run the risk of breaking the lower down the middle.